All right, you're good to start whenever.
Sweet. All right, I will share my screen. Let's see. Okay. All right. Can y'all see my presentation? All right. Cool. Cool. Let me make sure that I'm keeping an eye out here in the chat as well. Okay. Perfect. All right. So, hello. I'm Maggie. So, for those who don't know me, I am a UX designer, and I'm also an admin and game club lead in Design Buddies. So, welcome to Intro to UX and UI design and a little bit of Figma. So, hopefully, we'll get there. So kind of the things that we'll hopefully get through tonight. A little bit about design, what is human-centered design, UX design, UI design, all the things design, and I'll leave you with some resources and a little bit of getting started guide on Figma. So hopefully you can apply some of that knowledge onto the hackathon. So kind of like I said in the beginning, I'm a UX designer. I work for grocery tech, so I'm currently in the ecom. But I've been around for a little bit. I've worked at B2B, B2C, web and mobile in various industries. I'm talking fintech, agri-science, consultancy. So I am on my third job right now. So super exciting because I get to experience very different stuff, and the UX field is huge and there's plenty of opportunities and plenty to do. So if that's an area hopefully that you're interested in, or after tonight you're interested in, just know it's a huge field. Um, I'm also a mentor at ADP List, so you can find me over there, book a session with me. Happy to chat with y'all. And like I said, I'm part of the Sign Buddies. I actually have a background in human computer interaction and industrial design. So I've known design my whole life. And for fun, I'm a dog parent. I have two doggies, and I love to play games. Obviously, if I'm a game club lead, I kind of have to. And I love to travel when we're not in mid-pandemic. I enjoy just getting on a plane and going wherever. So that's a bit about me. So let's talk about design. So what exactly is design? Well, it's problem solving. It's creative problem solving, and it not always has to be creative. Depends how you define creative, but it's constantly evolving. And one of the important things about design is that it's a form that follows function, and then you're always trying to look to improve something in collaboration with other disciplines, right? Design is not the end all be all, but it's important. And it also has a lot of methods and processes, right? Which is a huge misconception if you think design is art, and it's not. So we're constantly asking questions. We're trying to listen and look for problems, and we're also trying to understand what those problems are from a human perspective, right? So that's where the empathizing kind of comes in. We need to be good listeners. We need to be good at observing, right? Because it's not about what people say; it's also about what people do. We're humans. We kind of behave unpredictably. And like I said, we seek out for ways to improve something. So if I'm noticing you're struggling with somebody, we see that as an opportunity, and we think through like, aha, how can we make that better for you? And design is all around us. Just look around you, right? It doesn't have to be digital, even though that's kind of where we are in technology. Bad design and good design are all around us. Just if you pay a little bit more attention and keep a keen eye, you'll start picking up stuff, right? I think once you open up that designer eye, it's really hard to turn it off. Like I'm always like going like, oh my god, why did they make that decision? So with all that said, it's about creating experiences, and that's just one part of it, but it's the part that we're here for. So in comes human-centered design. So what exactly is what exactly is human-centered design? I don't know if this will play, to be honest. But um, I will link out the presentation and you can watch it. It comes from, I believe, IDEO, and they have a lot of great resources over there. But kind of move forward, right? When we talk human-centered design, is that the human is essentially at the center of it. We cannot solve problems without considering we can't solve human problems without putting the human in the center, right? Yes, we're trying to look for the business size because capitalism, and we're hired by companies to improve processes and design and whatever products and services they have. And comes along technology because that's most of the time when you're in the digital space, that's how you execute an outcome is through something that's feasible. It's whether it's physical product or internet of things, right? Product with digital or just purely digital. There's always going to be that person who's going to end up using it, right? And whether we intentionally design something or not, they're going to have an opinion about it. They're going to have some sort of experience. So why not just make the best experience that we can and consider them and just bring them along the ride when we're going through the design process? And that's essentially what human centered design is all about. Now, there are some processes and methodologies that go into play, and you can kind of lay it out in this way where you have what we look into divergence and convergence, right? We're trying to expand and try to gain as much inspiration and try to understand the problem, and then we start narrowing it down a little bit, and that's where we are like, aha, these are the opportunities, these are the problems that we should focus on, and that's when we start to converge, and from there it's a little bit of a roller coaster, right? You start huge, that doesn't mean that you won't converge and diverge along the way, but you are narrowing down the scope essentially so that you have a very focused thing that you're trying to solve for, and that's essentially how that happens, and it's cyclical, right? Hackathon may have an ending, and certain designs have an end, but design is never done. That's something that I hope everybody understands. Is like design is it's gotta make sense within the context, constraints, limitations, user, all these things at that time. And that's kind of how you arrive at that design, making those decisions based on all those variables. So what are some examples? Make it a little bit more tangible, right? If we look at early non-digital, right, we have the original glass ketchup bottle. And the designer that essentially invented the squirt bottle that a lot of us see in restaurants is that the glass bottle is kind of unpredictable, kind of hard to manage. And the flow of the ketchup, it can be hard. Not the greatest thing to use. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful glass bottle, right? But it wasn't like the most efficient or the best thing to use to put ketchup on something. So hence Peta, they saw that as an opportunity, and then they came up with the squirty bottle for ketchup. Same with kids' toothbrushes. Kids, they have small hands, small mouths. Um, they're wanting, they're already struggling with like, why do I have to do this? Hygiene, like that's hard to understand and grasp. So trying to make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more manageable in terms of size and form fitting for them, right? Something that makes sense for that essentially that user. So that's essentially how we came about with these smaller, more chunkier too, easier to grab toothbrushes. And then last but not least, if we go into more of the digital space, they saw this as an opportunity for people who have schizophrenia. So they were just trying to a way to support how they would achieve their goals throughout the day based on schizophrenia, right? So this was again a very targeted. This doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but it helps those type of people manage their needs and makes their lives better. So those are just examples of whether it's digital or non-digital, how design kind of comes in along with other disciplines and solves a problem through whatever means necessary until a user is essentially like, yay, this solves my issues, yeah, and that's the good feel that you want out of design essentially. So I've been throwing a little bit of jargon, so hopefully you're keeping up. Let me know if I throw in something that doesn't make sense. Um, so user experience design. We've it's that term is one of many, right? If you look back, what essentially is user experience design. It's been around for quite a bit of time, right? We're looking at 38, almost 40 years of this has kind of been around, like solving problems that people encounter in a way that it meets their needs. Yeah, it's been like 40 years. The thing is that we've just been using different terms for them. We've been using different skills. As technology evolves, we use different tools, approaches, methodologies, you name it, right? So that's why if you ever look at job descriptions for people who have been around and you look at their resumes, um, they may have weird titles, and titles are kind of wonky all over the place, but these are just some examples of some of the titles that are out there, right? Man machine interface, user friendly systems, human factors, which is very engineering heavy, ergonomics, which is more in the physical space. Human computer interaction, right? That's my background. User centered design, talked about that a little bit, which is the same as saying human-centered design. Again, more titles, right? Usability, user experience, which is the most popular right now. I would say 60% of the people recognize this as the most popular currently. They did a quick survey, by the way, and that's kind of where we are. Customer experience is emerging, and that one takes a bigger look. I'm not going to even touch that because I'm not an expert there, but it even takes a wider look and consideration to the whole experience. And then product design is another common one we're seeing. I think that's more common in bigger companies and I believe in the West Coast too, but don't quote me on that. So user experience, right? What is user experience? Not that different from what I've said, but it essentially encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and all its products, right? We're taking into consideration whether it's digital or non digital, whether it's a piece of the puzzle versus a bigger, longer journey. We're taking all of that into consideration, and that's where we kind of come in. Somebody like me kind of comes in. And this is what I mean by the field is just, it's huge, right? So the disciplines of UX, when somebody says they can be a UX designer and they need some sort of design background, that's not entirely true, right? I've worked with people from various backgrounds. I've worked with somebody who used to be a poet, right? So it's really about as long as you know that this is about solving problems and you understand that and you have a process and you understand the methodologies, and you pull in from all these disciplines because that's essentially how UX kind of emerge is that we're a hodgepodge. We grab from all these disciplines to implement our own processes and our own methodologies, right? And that's how we end up with how we do things nowadays. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit. So UX focus, what is that? And I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. It's about the empathy. It's about understanding that it's about the human, it's about the user, it's about the customer always. Always. We are the advocate in every room. We're advocating for their needs, their goals, what's best for them all the time, right? And that can be a challenge when and sometimes we need to compromise because we do have a job to do because we are working for a company, and without a business, we can't really make money, and we can't really provide a product or service to somebody, right? So we need to keep the lights on essentially. So not not everything will be perfect, not everything will be ideal. It kind of goes back to it needs to make sense within that context, that place, that constraints, that team, timeline, you name it, right? And you won't ever 100% please everybody, especially when you're kind of like me who have thousands upon thousands of customers. But it is your duty, it is your mission as a UX designer to be that advocate, to always consider what is the best thing that we can do for the user. And like I said, what are the problems we're trying to solve for them? How can we help them achieve success? How do we help them feel better, feel awesome, be more efficient, more effective at whatever they need to do? If I am in a hurry and I need to get through a process in a quicker manner, how can I make it painless? How can I make it even quicker? Can I make it a one button process, right? Like oversimplifying, can I make it a one button process? So what do they need? What content do they need? What actions are they trying to get through? How did they even arrive there, right? Is it a unique situation? Is it a common situation? So situational motivations or experiences that kind of lead somebody to use a certain service or experience, right? For example, we kind of have to go and do groceries. That's kind of human nature, especially if you are the main uh, or the only one living in that household. You have to eat, or maybe you eat out all the time. Who knows? But that's a necessity, right? So a lot of people kind of land there on their own, but think of other services that you don't necessarily think of as a need, right? How do you keep somebody engaged? How do you even get there? How do you encourage them to keep using a service that they have every right to just quit and never use you again? Like that is not a basic necessity. So those are things you need to consider. How do you keep the lights on? And where are they going, right? What is their purpose here? What are they're trying to do? And is it a one and done? Do you really want it to be a one and done? Does it need to be a one and done, right? It's all the questions, always asking questions. So humans, kind of going back to the empathy a little bit. Humans, we have a large range of emotions, right? If we look at the wheel of emotions, if you ever look that up, or you know what I'm talking about, we go through a lot of emotions. And that is something you need to consider, and that's kind of why we need to map out and understand our users, is that, what are they feeling while they're using our service? If they're frustrated, that's an area of opportunity right there. Whether it's a low-hanging fruit or not, that's a different topic, but that is something they're experiencing. Why are they experiencing that? Is that something we control? Is that something we can improve? And those are immediate red flags, and it's like we need to make that better. If it's good, it's like, how do we make it? How do we maintain it, right? Because you want to keep the good. You don't want to neglect something that is working. Don't screw that up. So again, this is where asking for feedback and talking to users and keeping them in the loop as you design, that's why it's important, because they will be honest and they will be frank about what are their emotions, and sometimes there won't be, and that's where you need to also be a good listener and also be a good at observing, because again, what we say and what we do can be totally different sometimes. So, and again, solving problems. So remember, always give customers what they really, really need, not what they say they want. Again, we're kind of unpredictable and we don't match our behavior sometimes. So that's why you need to dig. You need to be very good at solving problems and understanding, making those connections and observations to get to something that is real, that is a real problem, right? We can make up problems, but what is the real problem? Some of the pillars of UX, because I think UX has been lately oversimplified. We have a lot, right? Going back to the disciplines that we come from and take from, the four pillars of UX are usability, research, interaction and interface design, along with information architecture. And all of these come from those different disciplines, right? If we're talking engineering, we're talking psychology, we're talking anthropology, all these other disciplines, we're grabbing from those disciplines and making a hodgepodge of our own because we understand how important those things are and how successful those things are in their own disciplines, that heck yeah, we need to bring them over so that we can solve problems where it makes sense for our teams. And when you put that in a way that you can execute it, right? When we think about UX design, is that we're going from something that's very abstract, it can be a very abstract problem, and then through problem solving and through research, by doing all these things, all these activities, all these, and which lead to deliverables, that's how we get to something that's concrete and that produces some sort of outcome. So that's why essentially we have these planes. I know they kind of don't look like planes, but um, these planes that are showing in the screen, right? Those are the different levels of how we go through a process, right? We start at a strategy, which means that we're trying to define what that problem is. We're trying to identify, we're trying to ask, we're trying to, who are we designing for? And from there, you start converging, right? You start focusing in. It's like, what is the scope? Okay, when, where, what, what are we doing? And then you start forming that structure. You start taking that information, you start pounding it into something that starts to make sense, right? So it's still rough, a rough in the diamond in the rough, but it's starting to take shape. And then you get some sort of skeleton, you get a rough idea, and it's getting more polished and polished and polished until you get into the surface, which is your diamond. And that is essentially the outcome, right? You can use that diamond for other things. But you go from a rock essentially, right? It's like all the way to something that's polished, and what people tend to think that is design, which is the end product, because it's the most tangible thing people tend to grab onto. But remember, it's way more than that. So UX design, here comes me. So what do we do as UX designers? We don't do all of the things that I mentioned, right? But we do a lot of it, right? We're trying to focus on the overall picture. We're trying to understand their problems, their needs, and walking through this process. And we're trying to utilize the data and design methodologies to essentially get to the final workflow, right? So if I say Mary needs to go to the airport and needs to check in, what does that process look like? What does that flow look like? All right, well, let's say she arrives to the airport and there's a check-in booth. What does she need to do through for her to check in, right? Like, what does that process look like? And that's kind of where we start to think through, like, okay, well, she needs this information and she's probably in a hurry, right? So we probably don't want to overwhelm her, and that's how you start forming that solution. And then we tend to do wireframes and prototypes and test and refine, uh, as well as research, depending on the type of UX designer that you are at your company. You may be more involved doing more things, but essentially we're focused in taking, again, something abstract and making it a little bit more tangible. And then, of course, hopefully, we're there for the execution, and you're cross collaborating with different partners, such as engineers, product owners, product managers, QAs, and working through the analytics, right? So if I build something, you know I'm going to try to look out for those success metrics, right? Because we want to understand if it works or if it's not working. Why is it not working? And one way to do that is by implementing success metrics. And those can be both numbers based or more feedback based. It's good to have a combination, right? Because getting feedback is not always as easy. So and you always want to have numbers so you can have that return of investment business speak. And it's always good to have a combination as well to justify your case and decision making. So some of the methodologies that I use in my UX design world is that, again, I'm identifying those problems and those goals based on research, right? Always based on research, whether it's you talk to people, you have some sort of feedback, you have customer service that you talk to, and it's like, hey, what are common problems that are coming through? You always want to base it off real feedback, right? I think it's really easy to get lost on opinions, and that's not what we're about. That's just guessing. Stories, journeys, empathy. Again, you're trying to understand all the information and then mapping it out in a way that makes sense. It's like, all right, this is what A, B, C, D, E looks like, and this is how we got here, or this is what the motion or the process of somebody going through this experience looks like. And then we have, again, prototyping and ideating. We're kind of quickly putting together ideas, testing them out, validating and validating, making sure that we're interviewing and testing, again, with real customers or users. And then we kind of iterate and refine, right? There's this approach called build, measure, learn. It's essentially what we want to do all the way, always, constantly. In everything that we do, is that, again, design is never done. You can be done for what the scope was, right? But you learn from that, and if it sucks, all right, back to square one. But you're gonna be under different constraints, and you're gonna be probably working with a different timeline. So that's something to take into consideration. But you're always learning, you're always building, and you're always hopefully learning, because that's how you get better. That's how the business grows too. And once you go through the motion, this is one way to represent it. There's various ways. Is that, again, when you're going from abstract to concrete, is that you're going from designing the right thing, making sure that you're designing the right thing. That's when you're defining it, to designing the thing right? You don't want to spend all this time defining and creating goals just to have a poor execution, and you don't want to do the opposite, right? You don't want to create these fake problems and create this solution. It's like, well, no, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't work. It can be beautiful, or it can be usable. It can still be a bad solution for the problem. And when I'm going through this process, and some of the things that I do is, I'm considering goals and objectives, target audience. I'm doing some competitive analysis, which means I'm looking at competitors. What are they doing? Can I steal some ideas? How do I make them better? Looking at success metrics. Why does that work? Right? That inquisitive mind. Why does that work? Creating personas, or maybe not even personas, because you don't always have to do them, but understanding who you are designing for. That's the important. What are their needs? What are their goals? What are they trying to do? What is the most frustrating part for them? That is the most important thing. And then, of course, research. Hopefully you're understanding all of this via research. And when you move away from that, then you're starting to create, you're starting to ideate, right? I love to sketch. I try to always start with a sketch, but it's okay depending on the type of design that you're doing. You don't always have to sketch. It's a preference and depends on who you are and what you do. But that's just me. User journeys, right? Again, mapping out those experiences, understanding the flows, information architecture, making a sense out of any mess, which is also the title of a great information architecture book. It's also free on the website. So it's just, again, making sense, grouping things in a way that makes sense based on research. And then understanding what's the content that goes in that design. I think that's also a good one that people tend to miss, is that they create these designs and they don't even know the content, or they put fake content. And I think that's fine for like super beginning, low level, quick ideas, but that's not going to work once you start getting into maybe a little bit more refined ideas, because you will soon realize, oh, I didn't take into consideration all of these things. And now you need to kind of go back. So it's always good if you have content from the beginning. That's always going to help you. And then from there, you start creating those wireframes. You start refining. You start integrating more of that visual style, especially if you have some sort of design system, right? You start integrating bits and pieces of it, or you let yourself be guided by the style guide if there is one. You create prototypes and interactions, like what does this look like? Do we need loading states? How many seconds is this gonna load for? Do we put a constraint in there, right? All these little things. And then of course there's this area that people tend to forget, but you should always make time for, is that test. You test, go back, make sure that what you're designing again makes sense, because things might have changed, you might have missed something, and it's better for you to spend time building something that can be easily tossed away than a developer building something and then having to toss that away. That is a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you don't want to be in that situation. Not to say it doesn't happen, but what we're trying to do as a UX designer is minimize the risk, because we're validating as we go or invalidating as we go, and we're minimizing that risk so that once comes the delivery time, right? Time to deliver, time to produce, time to implement, that we've reduced the risk enough that our design should be somewhat successful. And if not, then we at least tried, but we gave it our all. We tried based on everything that we gathered. And then you learn from there based on the success metrics. So that's when you want to make sure that, again, you're setting up the analytics, you're setting up feedback loops. So for example, once I launch, how soon do I want to start getting feedback? How soon do we want to start comparing results? And if you have new components, start integrating them into your design systems, and have those conversations with your other designers, or if you're the only designer, and your developers, of course. So again, kind of depends. Where I'm gonna say that word a lot, because that's kind of it really does depend on all the variables that I've mentioned throughout this presentation. So UI design, finally. Um, UI design is just the visual components. A user needs to interact with a product made up of elements like buttons, input fields, toggles, radio button, etc. Right? It's the tangible thing that we tend to criticize a lot, especially if we're in the digital side. Um, these are the things that we grab onto. It's like, oh man, that sucks, or oh man, the contrast on that is terrible, because it's just the easiest thing we can grab onto and what we're interacting with, of course. So UX is not design, UI. They're part of a bigger umbrella. UI is part of that bigger umbrella. UX is part of even a larger umbrella. So it's important to understand, UI is just tangible parts. It's just the physical or visual components that somebody interacts with. And there's a lot going on there, and I'll get that in a bit. But they're not the same. So when we say UX UI, we're kind of minimizing all of the things that I previously said before, because UX, it encompasses a larger experience. It takes into consideration these workflows and experiences and different interactions that may not even be UI. So that's the important piece. Now, UI design does include a lot of stuff, right? So we're talking color, typography, iconography, imagery, visual design, graphic design, spacing, responsive design, etc. You name it. I can name them all, especially when we keep growing as a field. But these are just some of them. And of course, if you're a dedicated UI designer, you're likely going to be working as with a UX designer, and that's depends on the company's maturity and different roles that they have. But that will likely be your interaction, and sometimes it's the same person. Sometimes you own the whole thing, and you're more of a generalist at that point. So when does UI come into play? Well, hopefully you've been working with your UX designer, so you're not, it's not like a toss up. It's not like a tossing this over the wall and now you need to take care of everything that I previously said about mapping experiences and you take care of making it pretty. No, hopefully that's not the case. Shouldn't be the case. Um, but UI, again, since it's the tangible parts, it's it should start being considered when the problem is already identified. We know what we're after, or at least we have a good idea that, hey, this is what we're gonna try to solve for. And we understand what the process looks like, we understand what the flow looks like, and there already has been some wireframes and sketches, or you are sketching with that person, right? Um, and then you can start implementing some UI components, some content, and then as well doing some testing along the way, some user testing along the way to know, okay, yeah, that's the direction that we want to go visually, right? Because we can get into the weeds real quick. And as a UI designer, what you're responsible for, and again, you can be responsible for many things, but these are some of them, right? Is something you're in charge of the holistic aesthetic and visual language across an entire system. uh, if you ever, I don't want to point fingers, but if you ever go to different websites and you notice that there are parts of a website that kind of look one way and then you jump to another page and they look different, there's probably a lot going on there. But ideally, as a UI designer, if you work together and the um, all conditions are being met, that shouldn't be the case. It should be one cohesive visual language. And that's why we're always trying to look for consistency, and you're trying in that visual aspect is it's trying to be legible. You want to make sure people understand what's on the page, so you don't want them to struggle. Same with branding and graphic development, right? You want to adhere to the company, the business, right? You don't want to misrepresent them at any point. And then you're also working, especially on the digital side, you're working with responsiveness and interactivity, right? Like what are the different bits and pieces that are moving? How do they move? Animation sometimes comes into play, motion comes into play. And, if you're doing app design, then you need to look into the nativeness of the different components, et cetera, et cetera. And some of the UI principles that UI designers tend to look out for is like, all right, constantly removing clutter, right? You don't want to do some information overload on anybody. Looking for contrast. If you can't read or understand something, then why are you putting it there? Some visual hierarchy, right? If it's all the same text font or all the same size, is like, how do you, where do you, how does your eye know where to go first? Same with white space, same with balance and consistency. So some of the things, kind of like I said, color theory. Color theory is important because again, colors make us feel stuff. And different colors represent different things for different cultures. So that's again going back to that human aspect is like, all right, who are you designing for? What do they think of these colors? What does that mean for them? And again, that may or may not change how you implement certain things. So when you think about colors, remember, don't try to overdo it. 2 to 3 is fine. You probably don't need more than that, to be honest. Unless it's a photograph, that's different. And you always want to make sure that there's enough contrast, right? You want to make it accessible. Uh, don't saturate it too much. Again, easy on the eyes. And then always consider your audience or your context. Last thing you want is to put something that looks very vibrant and happy on like a medical site. Like that is, you don't do that because it just doesn't fit. So, and when you're using colors, right? Define your primaries, your secondaries, your errors, your success. It's always nice to work off some sort of color scheme, so that way, again, you can come back to that cohesive and consistent look and feel. Same with typography. Did you know that about roughly 95% of the web is typography? Like, look at this. You know, it's a lot, right? Content and typography, super important. Like, look at that difference. I know Twitter is supposed to be heavy on content, but just think about it. Like, everything that's on the internet, or majority of it, is content, is typography, right? So, fonts matter. Fonts matter. Fonts matter for a lot of reasons. Um, Again, consider your content, your context, your users, because I will always find you written like this versus in a more cutesy font. Totally different things. And some tips for you as you're creating through the hackathon: one or two fonts. One or two fonts. Don't overdo it. Also consider people don't read; they skim. It's been proven. There's research. We don't read. I don't read. You don't read. Nobody reads unless we're hunting and pecking for information. We just skim. We just skim until we find something we can hang on to. Try to have some sort of grid, some sort of axis that you can go off of, right? We don't want stuff that's kind of misaligned. Try to avoid long lines, and then consider line height and type size. There's a lot of examples out there that you can just honestly quote unquote steal, right? Um, they're just good practices. It's not stealing. And some of the things that exist within the UX and UI world, we have components, buttons, forms, menus, tabs, tables, you name it. It can be broken into so many things. And the good thing is that as you're going through this process, you don't have to start from scratch. Like, don't do that to yourself. If you go to Figma, create an account. If you don't want to have one already, go to the community tab. Familiarize yourself with that tab. There are so many free resources to get you started. Start typing in keywords. You'd be amazed by how many free resources people have put out there. It's just amazing. So the takeaway that I want you to take away with you is that, you know, UI is not siloed. It's not always about wowing. You can have something very beautiful and be totally useless. Work with constraints, and then UI without the user, well, you take that user away for all of this that I've previously talked about. It's just art. It's just opinions. It's just guessing. It's not true design problem solving. And always have an inquisitive mind. Start asking why. Why do we do certain things? These two buttons are fine. They just have different context. There is not necessarily one that's better than the other, at least for not for this example, right? So take that into consideration. Why does this one have an arrow and the other one doesn't? Who knows? So I know we're running a little bit of short on time. I don't know if I'll get through this. So I want to make sure are there any immediate questions before like I jump into a quick exercise?
Oh yeah, I had a question from before.
Go for it.
Remember when you mentioned feedback?
Yes.
What's like an effective way to get feedback? Because it's like sometimes when I'm like taking these surveys they ask me to take, I never really answer them like honestly. So I'm just wondering what are like effective ways.
Yeah, I would say kind of depends. Feedback can come in so many different shapes and forms. So it can be moderated, which would mean I would just sit down with you and start asking you questions, right? And that way I can kind of control the conversation and really hunt and peck for the information that I'm looking for. So it's a little bit harder to be dishonest. Like I would say if I'm like asking you questions straight up at an interview, Like, I feel like you would need to put more effort trying to be dishonest about that feedback. Than hiding behind like a survey, right? Like, surveys suck. Like, I think they're easy, but they also suck at the same time. And sometimes there are one way to get feedback, but it's not going to be the best feedback. So you kind of have to balance it out. If that's what's accessible to you, it comes with a huge asterisk that it may be good feedback, but it may not be. So it's a constraint that you're essentially limiting yourself to. And as long as you understand that, it's like, well, we just couldn't get a lot of feedback from real users, so this is the best we could do. That's fine, but it's a bias. Just take that into consideration, and hopefully the next time around, um, hopefully you do get better feedback. But again, everybody works under different constraints. Did that answer your question? Sweet.
Yeah, I did.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So I'll jump into Figma real quick. Again, I don't know if you want to follow along or just kind of observe me, but one way to kind of get through a challenge, or I should say, let me step back. Figma is really good for doing a lot of visual stuff, and it has a lot of tools that you can use. You have your toolbar up here, you have pages, you can add more pages, you can kind of control them, move them up and down. I know since we don't have a lot of time, there's a lot of intro videos, just quick how to in Figma, just YouTube them. There's a lot of That's how I learned how to use Figma, is literally just Google or use YouTube. They are my best friends. I will never trade them for anything else. So there's that. So this is one way to also collaborate with other people. I think this is an excellent way because you can start throwing in text and shapes and boxes. So again, if you kind of want to follow along kind of quickly as I do this, if I say, hey, I want to pursue this challenge of I want to design an app where pet owners want to interact with their pets when they're not at home. Okay, and I know that is both a product and an app, and these are the things I'm working with. This is what I know of. Then you start defining who are you defining for, right? So pet owner probably has a pet, obviously. Typical pet. Let's say it's a typical pet, like a dog or a cat. Let's say they are emotionally attached to this pet, right? Like if they really want to interact with this pet while they're away, there's probably a huge, strong bond. So they're willing to spend money on pet. And we can start again defining what this person looks like based on people we talk to or people we know, right? So they obviously have a phone because this is an app. So I'll write mobile. It can be Android, it can be iPhone. And these can also be assumptions that we start making based on this information. It's like, well, they probably go away a lot, or they don't work from home, right? So if they're wanting to see their pet, they're obviously not home. And we can start building that profile. And then after you build that profile, well, what are some of the needs or pain points? So if this person is wanting to interact with their pet, they probably miss them, miss their pet, right? So they probably want to see their pet, right? They're worried about what their pet is up to. They're all these things, right? And again, I'm just kind of jotting this from experience because I do own 2 dogs. So what are some possible solutions? Well, I can have some sort of like walkie-talkie situation. I can have a camera. That's one way. It's kind of like a security camera. Um, I can have it dispense treats. Um, I can maybe have it record and monitor for me. I can have it maybe take pictures throughout the day. Maybe have it alert. Give me some sort of alert if it's maybe my dog's not reacting at all. Like, I would like to know. I'm worried. Again, it goes back to those needs and pain points. Like, that's an emotion that is like, yeah, I'm worried about my pet. I'm not there. I want to know what they're up to. So again, being observant, be empathizing with that person. Kind of cheated here. And for the competitive analysis, obviously, if you're familiar with Furball, kind of grab their interface. So one of the things that is great about the internet is that if you don't have access to an app, or want to know more about something, you don't want to experience it yourself, there's probably a video or pictures out there. You just start grabbing them. But I think it's important that while you're doing some sort of competitive analysis, that you do play around with some of the competitors, right? If just to get a better understanding of what that experience feels like. So that's also another way to empathize with the user, is that you get to sit in their shoes and experience some of these competitors and some of the things, some of the workarounds that they're dealing with. That's another important one. What are the workarounds? How are they currently mitigating for this need? And then you start defining some tasks. Don't think I have time for that. And then essentially, I would lead to some wireframes. So I would start designing like screen one looks like this, screen two looks like this, so forth, right? Until you kind of have some sort of interface that you can prototype and you can test with people. And like I said, spend a little bit of time with Figma. Again, this is where you control the left side is where you get to create and grab stuff from and arrange different elements, but the right is where you manipulate them. So if you need to align them, right? If I need to align all of these, I would go here, boom, they're aligned. If I need to shrink them, I can control the size over here. If I need to make this have a large like border or a stroke, I would control that here. So I think that is the basic 101 that I can give you.
I have a question regarding content on Figma.
Yeah.
Is it possible to do some sort of like interactive prototypes where, like, say if I have a form and I can fill it out, it'll sort of like create an entry similar to what I'm looking for?
So Figma has some limitations, unfortunately. I totally know where you're going with this. There are more powerful tools to kind of replicate that. Oftentimes, Figma is more of what they call more of a happy path. So if I connect, right, this is my prototype tab, by the way, over here. So I can connect these two screens, hopefully. Come on. Oh, it's not in a frame. See? Important things. So I'm going to put these two in a frame. And I can connect these, right? And I can define, hey, on click, on drag, all these things. Now, if I want to kind of have some sort of pseudo way to have some sort of form, I would just have it be more of a on click, it magically fills the form for you. I know it's kind of fakey, but it's one way to represent that prototype. Again, limitations of Figma, and there are better tools to do that are not coding. Like I've done that with HackOR and Framer. Those are better, much better prototyping tools.
Got it. Thank you. And then I have another question. Is there like any sort of holy grail on like design decisions? So sort of like when you use icons for words, or how you want to structure certain sort of pages, like the settings page. Like, I guess, like, what's a good resource to know like why common apps use like a certain like sort of like button style for like on or off versus like explicitly typing in like on/off,
Yeah, a lot of it comes from research too, but there are, have you ever heard of Google Material?
Yeah, like material design.
Yeah, material design,
Yeah.
right? I think those are good starting points, mainly because they have documented a lot of these rationales, and they kind of work with examples. Sometimes they don't have, don't get me wrong, sometimes they don't have the best rationale. And it comes from years of standardizing. And honestly, I sometimes when in doubt, I can do a quick Google search as to best practices or standards for X component, right? So if I wanted to figure out when does it make sense to use top navigation versus side navigation, there are articles out there, and they will always say it depends and test with your users, because it really does depend on those constraints. There are things that are big no-nos, like gosh, I can't think any on top of my head. But there are big no-nos that you should avoid. But besides, like, as long as it's legible, it's usable, makes sense, and you're not breaking the previous principles and things I kind of went over before, then you're at a good baseline. You kind of test it out, and even amongst yourselves, right? Like, go through the process, go through the prototype yourself. That's kind of like pseudo testing, or user testing. You're just kind of doing like a test pre-test. I'm rambling, but essentially you also experience different designs, so you also kind of get a sense of what seems right. And you should understand, like, some of your competitors too. Grab some ideas, right? Don't try to come up with the next Apple design. Like, you're not trying to be innovative. It's about being practical and pragmatic most of the time. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it perfectly. Thank you so much.
Right. Good. So yeah, I honestly, these are just a bunch of resources, and I'll link my presentation over here in the chat in a second. But any other questions? I know I kind of rush at the end, but want to make sure that I'm covering what you guys are curious about.
I was just gonna ask about like one of the previous slides we were on when it was like the 10 different names for the title. I was wondering, why do you think they changed so much?
Ah, yes. This slide.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. It so it's funky. It's funky because when it comes to businesses and job roles and titles, they're all over the place, because I don't think we have a good way to standardize one. And sometimes we kind of follow trends, right? Like the next buzzy word, we kind of sometimes we kind of fall on that. And then it kind of goes spiraling from there. But part of it also is that we evolve, and language evolves, and roles evolve, and then they become to they start getting a little bit more distinct, right? Like, before there was like an explicit designer, I think there used to be some sort of engineering designer hybrid, possibly. And then as we started introducing more tasks and more problems and larger needs, then we started seeing that need to separate different things, because again, technology just is more complicated now than it used to be. So there's a need to have different roles and different focuses and specialties, and that's kind of how we ended up in this. And I think part of it is to blame, that people just kind of follow buzzwords, and we kind of ride the wave sometimes, and it's not good. But we survive, we thrive, we just evolve from it. That's kind of why. Good question. Any other questions? Oh, and if you guys don't want to see this like this view, just click on the triangle over here in the upper corner, and it'll throw you into more of a presentation type of mode, so that you're not super distracted by everything else. And that's also how you see prototypes, by going to the present mode.
I have another question.
Yep.
What does like your daily tasks look like at work? Like, what do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah. Good question. I always say it depends on the week. It depends on the week. And right now I'm more of a generalist, so I really do end up doing a little bit of everything at my job. And because I do have a strong background in research, it's just easy for me to just set up a lot of these user tests and research um, priorities. That's kind of what I've been doing this week. Not to say that next week looks like that. So a lot of it has been planning. I spend a lot of time in Google Drive, by the way. Like, that is, if we're talking tools, and we shouldn't, but if we're talking tools, that is my biggest flex. Is like, yeah, I spend a lot of time in Google Drive, because we're always documenting and we're always writing down thoughts and idea. Uh, Later, Miles. Glad you swung by. But essentially, that's kind of how my day looks like today. But come next week, I'll be doing a little bit more design, putting together some prototypes to test. Hopefully, setting up some feedback loops. So yeah, it really depends. Especially when you work with other designers, we kind of divvy up tasks too. So we're always like rotating on different efforts as well.
All right, so we're gonna switch over to the next session now. So if you have any further questions for Maggie, you can go ahead and chat to her in the Discord, and there should be a section in the Discord you can ask your questions in. And yeah, just want to let you know that we're going to be switching into our next session, which I'll post in the announcement shortly.
Mm-hmm. All right. It's nice meeting y'all. Hopefully you learned something, and don't be shy in asking me questions. All
Thank you.
right. Have a good one.
Hey, can I ask a quick question? It's just a short one. So, are you guys getting late? Then it's okay. Maggie?
I'm here. I don't know if Ryan's gonna shut us down.
Oh, sorry. Now I'm switching it over so I can get the next people set up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
Go ahead and send me a message. I'll message there, answer there.